Well, hello everybody and welcome to March. It kind of snuck up on us, didn't it? My name's Hilary Stupa. I'm a developer with Qdabra software. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about multi-line text with history enabled and FormsViewer. We recently worked on a project where we had some columns that had version history enabled on them where the text appends changes. And we needed to implement some workarounds for that in FormsViewer. I just want to make sure everybody's aware of those workarounds and knows how to implement them if they need them. This is a pretty short slide deck, but we are going to walk through the changes needed. So the main problem is that multi-line columns in SharePoint lists with the append changes to existing text options selected leverage version history to retain data. And you guys have probably seen that setting before. Some of you have probably used it. List forms that we've migrated to FormsViewer aren't querying for this version history data by default. So when you open up your migrated list form, you won't see the prior changes to the text like you had been seeing it in InfoPath Forms Services. And of course, your users are used to seeing those changes. Your users expect to see those changes, and we want to show those changes to your users because otherwise, what's the point of keeping that version history and appending changes? So the main solution is to add a REST API query to get the version history. It's pretty simple. I'll show you the gotchas on that. And then you just modify the UI to display the version data. The UI is already going to have a little repeating section and so forth on it from your InfoPath Forms Services times, and it's just a matter of doing some rebinding. As I was setting up my demos for this, I ran into another problem. And so there is one more little gotcha here that we're going to take a look at. And that other problem is that we don't have, this sounds more confusing than it is. Trust me, when you see the demo, you'll get it. List forms don't have a value field by default in these types of columns when you're editing an existing list item. The value field is where your current text value goes. And that's a problem because if you don't have a field there, if you don't have an element there in the XML, you get an error, first off. Second off, you can't save the data, so that's a problem. And we can use Q rules to add that field when it's missing so that users can add comments when they're editing existing items. We're going to move straight into the demo, and that is because really all of this stuff is more interesting to see than to talk about. So the first thing we're going to look at here is what is the REST query like to fix this? Now, when we go and add a, just going to move my little controls there. I'm going to click the Show Advanced View. I do not have much tolerance for that special SharePoint list view there. So let's look at, I only used one of these for my demo. So let's look at this. This test field here is set up to append to existing. So if we go look over here at my test list entries, you can see that we've got this, view entries option, right? And we click on that. Hopefully I haven't broken this. You know how it is with your test stuff. It's always in a shady state. Right, and you can see for both of these, we've got, all of the prior entries. And if I were to edit this using my SharePoint form here, this is the built-in SharePoint stuff, not InfoPath Forms Services. It's similar in InfoPath Forms Services form. You can enter your value here, and then you can move on about your day. You click Save, and your new data gets added down here. So I'll go ahead and go back to my list. So when you add one of these fields, here to your InfoPath form, and basically adds it like this. This is the value field I'm talking about, the one that isn't included by default when you're editing an existing item. This is the repeating section that's showing the history. So the first challenge we have is getting this history, right? We need to get the name, the date, time, and what the value was. The solution to that is to use a REST query. Now, I have a sample set up here, and we'll start with this bit of it, okay? And so this is the first piece that I need. This is going to the versions endpoint. The things you will change is you see mine says customize list. get by title from the list service means the display title. So when you go to create this, you're looking at this title. If my URL was something like customized list, all one word, or some whole different thing, right, you would still use the display title here. Does add a little fragility because of course users can change that display title, but just tell them no and that they're bad users and you're not going to let them do that. So here we've got we're getting our list by title. The items, you can see I've got a 1 here. That indicates I'm getting the item with the ID of 1. That's something we'll change in our form when we need to go get versions for a given item. And then I've got this select clause right here. Now you can see I'm selecting modified, that's the date time modified. I'm selecting editor, and I'm selecting PTTest. That is the internal name of my field. Your field might be named comments or comment or some other thing. You'll need to change that to match what your field is named, right? And then modified and editor are always going to be the same. Now, if you need to figure out what your fields are named, just use the first part of this query in your browser. I'm a big proponent for testing our REST queries in the browser. Don't test them in InfoPath because that's just a veil of tears, right? You're changing your form and then you're checking on it and so forth. Yes, this is XML and it's not always that easy to read in the browser. There's tools that can make that easier. If you have a tool like Notepad++, you can paste it in here and then change your language setting, right? And then pretty print that, right? So that it looks easier to read, right? And then you can start looking through here and you can say, aha, that's the name of my column. That's the name of my column. So if you have any trouble knowing what that internal name is, that's one way to do it. Testing your URL in the browser is a great plan anyway, rather than changing your InfoPath form, publishing it, and being like, what's wrong, okay? Now, I only want these 3 fields for my history. I don't care about the rest of the data, and I'm not going to pull back data I don't need. So I'll test this URL real quick, and this is just getting back the versions for item 1. You can change this to item 2 and so forth, right, to play with it a little bit and get a sense of what data you're getting back. I'm sticking with item 1 here. It's my test item, and I know it's not broken. Everything else is in question. However, you'll note that if we search for, I'm going to search for my field here. All right, so you'll note that in some occasions here, that field is null. Well, that's because other changes may have been made to the list item that didn't involve this comments field being changed. So we don't want in our form here to be displaying the null values. And if we're not going to display, because who cares, right? If nobody actually changed the comment, nobody cares. And if we're not going to display the null values, let's not query for them. We definitely only want to query for the stuff we're going to need. A little hard to read here with the %20s in here. I'll just change those back to spaces. The browser address bar will re-encode those. But basically, I'm saying PTTest. Now remember, that's my field. Your field might be named comment, comments, some other thing. Not equal, null, right? And so if I do this in the browser, and we'll just do this. And note the syntax, it's $select, $filter, and separating those clauses. Again, if you check your syntax in the browser, you can't go wrong. You do that first, and then you make your life a little easier. And I'm going to search for PTTest again. And you can see again now that I don't have any PTTests that are null. Okay, so now these all have a value. So I am confident now in my URL. That being done, I can add it to my form as a data connection. So I'm going to add a REST data connection here. I'll just do next. It's REST. Next. Now I just go ahead and enter the whole URL, filter and all. You don't have to. You can skip the filter and add it later. I don't want to because I'm lazy. And then I'm going to give this a meaningful name. Right. And I don't want to get this when the form is opened. I want to get this I want to be able to change this and pass in the correct ID of the current list item. Okay, so we do finish, close. I've got Q rules in my form. You probably do too. If you're in FormsViewer, you will want Q rules in your FormsViewer list form so we can add this value field as needed. So I'm going to go ahead and just demo this with a rule on finished loading instead of on form load. So we're going to get history. Maybe not. We'll see. Learn to spell. And I only want to get this if I have a list item ID. Okay, and we could also add, finished loading is equal to true. This is a demo, so I'm not super worried about being terribly precise. But ID is not blank. Why? Why do I want ID to not be blank? Well, that's because I'm passing in the ID here to get the correct item. Okay, so I just want to make sure it's not blank before I do that. We're going to change a REST URL. And here is our REST URL. I only have one REST connection, so InfoPath is going to help me. Here's what I have to change. I have to pass in the correct ID, right? So a couple of little commas, couple quotes, and we'll put a concat around this in just a second. I think everybody does these things their own way, and I'm imagining my way of doing these things might be a little strange, but for some reason, I like to get that punctuation in order first. So we can verify our formula. Okay, so now I'm passing in the ID. So we all know I'm using ID 1 because that's my test item that I know is in good shape for this demonstration. But if I had opened up the list form for ID 25, then this would pass in 25 and get the version history for it. Now, don't be like me. Don't just change the REST URL. Always add a query, right? Because I forget that. I'll change something and be like, why am I not getting my data back? Okay, that is that. Now, the only thing I have left to do is I need to address this section. I'm going to delete that little bit of text. So I'm going to change the binding here. And I'm just going to change the binding to my new REST API call. Now, this returns data that looks a little complex, but you all have dealt with complex data before. I see these names here. You people have seen complicated data, right? So we're going to select entry. That is our repeating thing. That's what we have to bind our repeating section to. Now that we've done that, we have to select the internal stuff that these fields are. This field down here was bound to the prior value. So we've got to drill down here. It's in content, it's in properties, and it's named the same as the field was. So that is my actual field. We say, okay. I happen to know that I'm going to need just one field for date time instead of multiples because of FormsViewer and date time. We'll just change this calculated value to, again, down we go. This is my person. So here's my editor. It's the lookup value field is their display name, okay? And then this one is going to be my date time. And I'm gonna pretty it just a little bit because it does come back in, I think it's UTC. So we'll just do that. And I'm gonna go over here, translate, and modified. I'm just gonna get rid of the T and the Z. I'll replace the T with a space, and I think that leaves the Z alone. So I just prettied that up a tiny bit. Let me do file save as here, and we'll call it my fancy names before, after. I've got an after one just in case I blow this, right? And then I've got one. Okay, so there we go. So to show you what this looked like before, here is my sample item. And you can see we've got all the fields, and you can see here where we looked at the before template, there's actually nothing showing here. I noticed when I was setting this form up that this field, this is where I ran into the value issue, that this field has an interesting rule on it. This shows up by default in a list form, hide control and display view, value is not present. So I was like, oh, well, that's silly. I'll just delete that rule. So I deleted that rule, and I'm going to delete it here so you can see this, and then we'll implement the value fix, okay? Because I want to show you kind of the full process. That way you'll know why I did the weird thing I did. Okay. Back over here we go, and let us find our during form, upload it. And here is my list form. Again, this is still list item 1. And I'm going to refresh it. All right, now you can see I've got, editor. I've got my date time. It's, like I said, it's UTC. If you want to pretty that up, you can use QRules format date time and some helper fields or something like that. We also have, I think, some JavaScripts for converting time. So just holler if you run into some challenges with that. So you can see this is all kind of nice. I've got my historical text here showing, and there I tested and whoops, look, that's what I was talking about. That's where I was like, now wait a minute, what is that about? So I had taken off that rule to hide that value field. And now when I type in it, I get an unexpected error. So I was wondering why I was getting that. I don't know if you guys, I've probably shown you guys this before, but there's some little lines we can paste in the console to get back data source information. So I'm going to do that. I'm just going to paste in this line that will get me back the main data source. And that's what I wanted to look at, because I'm like, well, why is that throwing an error? And if I go look at the main data source and drill down, I find something very, very interesting. And that is that my, this is also very interesting. I find that my PTTest here doesn't have a value field, okay? Yet in my form, my binding here is to the value field. And obviously I can't change that text box and bind it to this group. So my form doesn't have a value field right now. And I need that value field if I wish to allow the user to enter more information. Okay, so I will be adding a QRules command for this to add this field if it's not present. Go back to Qdabra rules, finish loading, and new action, add value field. And I'm only going to do this. Oh, hello. Let me get back to where I was. I'm only going to do this if it's missing, right? So select a field group and main and data fields, value is not present, right? That's what we're looking for. If it's not present, then we're going to run a QRules command to set it. The QRules command is going to be the insert command. And I do not think I made a note of that, but that's all right because I've got it here in my after form. We'll take a quick look at that. Show advanced view, QRules, finish loading, manage, add value field. Okay, so let me copy this out and close this guy. So here's what our insert command looks like. We've got insert, the parent is your comment field, your field with history enabled, right? Minus PTTest. We're inserting the child, which is value, and I'm inserting 1. I don't know that you have to include the count parameter. I think if you don't, it only inserts 1, but better safe than sorry. So back we go here to finish loading, add value field, set a field's value. That field is, Control V, we say okay. And then we'll just save this, thanking our lucky stars that we don't have to publish it. I tell you what, that is always something I appreciate. I don't know if anybody else loathed publishing. I always felt like publishing my InfoPath form was sort of a gamble, right? I felt like I was living high stakes. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know if this is going to work or not, or maybe it's going to publish and not be browser enabled, or maybe it's just not going to publish. So yeah, it's always a relief not to have to take that step. All right, let's see what happens now. And now I can enter text without getting an error. If I had been smart and added a submit button here, I could show you that it now submits correctly and saves the text. Let's just take one more second and do that. And button properties, submit, and submit data. I won't even name the rule, you guys. I'm just going to be super efficient here, right? There we go. Okay. one last go with this. So at any rate, these were just some interesting problems that we ran into recently, and I just wanted to make sure everybody knew how to address them in FormsViewer. I wanted to make sure we had this documented so people could, self-serve and find this information. It is a pretty specific situation, but if you are using append as your list setting that you're adding changes, you will want to be able to do this. So I'm just going to submit, and then I will have to refresh this to show you the change. And you can see that here we've got our testing again line. It looks like I managed to enter text twice, but so it goes. At any rate, back to our slides. That is it, short and sweet. The slides include a REST URL sample in the notes to help you. Otherwise, there's really not much to share here. I'll throw in my sample form just because it does have the actual 2 rules in it, and then you've got those to look at. And of course, you guys know where to find me. You know where to find us if you need support. So if you are migrating a list form and you are set up to append changes in a multi-line text column and you need help with this, reach out. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. I don't see any at this point. I want to mention that FormsViewer has just released 8.1. There's some great fixes in there. The one that I most value right now is that the way we are dealing with your with the cached credentials, I think is what the issue was, where if you had FormsViewer on 2 separate site collections on the same SharePoint instance, you would end up with credential issues. Sometimes that's been fixed, so it's wonderful. I said we're shipping 8.1 very soon, but it got shipped earlier this week. As always, just really appreciate your attendance and your continued support. If you need anything, you know where to find us. You can email me or you can email support, and we are always happy to help you and always glad to see you. I hope everybody has a fantastic rest of their day and rest of their week. Take good care.